Hi YouTube, Darth here. I want to talk today about something that bothers me whenever I hear the word, and that word is overpowered. It doesn't bother me at face value, but what bothers me is when people use it baselessly. I've seen a lot of players across a lot of games typically use this term when there is some facet of the game they find to be unfair. Now, sometimes these folks give an accurate analysis of a game design flaw, and other times those players simply find fault where none exists, or they aren't considering the bigger picture of a game's design. Inevitably, it seems like everything in a game gets declared overpowered at some point or another. For today's gameplay, I'm using a shotgun on a close quarters map, Operation Metro. A lot of people have called shotguns overpowered since the spring patch. Some of this discussion is founded in fact, and others are simply venting their dislike of something that killed them. I think my favorite slam is the very tired noob weapon argument. If you type these words into chat, I've got news for you. You're the noob. But before I go any further, I'd like to talk about what actually does make something overpowered. For any game, we can consider a player choice to be overpowered when it does one of two things. It's extremely easy to use and very effective while being hard to counter, or it's so good amongst other choices that it makes those other player choices not very interesting. As an example from Battlefield 3, it could be said for a very long time that the M16A3 fell into the latter category. It was so good among the assault rifles that there really wasn't much choice in the majority of situations. The developers changed this over time, but the lingering stink never quite left the weapon, even after many other choices became viable. This introduces a complexity that makes game design and balance difficult: player bias. Player bias can have a huge effect on the community at large in a multiplayer game. Players often have different playstyles and different perspectives in a game. Something that might seem overpowered to one set of players might be outrageously fun to another. Either set of players could be in the right. Players often don't see beyond their own playstyle patterns and are often obstinate when they are forced to change what makes the game fun for them. Sometimes these same players have the ability to profoundly affect the community opinion about otherwise minor points. They could be very right about the balance when viewed entirely from their perspective. But this is why it's important for players, and in particular the game designers, to consider the game at large. So how does one reconcile two player opinions that are completely at odds? By simply looking at data as evidence. Now, there are some very smart people over at Simthic.com that have made quite a bit of game data available on their own time. This kind of data is very useful in helping players make those interesting decisions about the game. But this isn't the only data I'm talking about. Let's go with shotguns as an example. I've seen multiple players claim that shotguns are completely overpowered in the current game design. So why isn't everybody using shotguns all the time at all ranges? That right there tells me that there is something betraying the argument that shotguns are completely overpowered. Maybe at particular ranges they are overpowered, but how do we prove this through data? As players, we really can't do that as easily as game developers. We generally only have access to anecdotes, but developers can typically go deeper. Behind the scenes, collecting information on player behavior and statistics is extremely critical for making decisions. How often do players kill one another with shotguns after a patch? Does it completely outweigh every other class of weapons? What ranges are players being killed at typically? If you're playing a multiplayer game from the last 10 years, chances are the developers are looking at this kind of information. As players, we can get a glimpse through websites like BF4stats.com that interface with Battlefield's available data. The developers have even more power and are likely looking at patterns, statistics, and data to weigh design decisions. It is completely on the developers to decide what is overpowered and what is not. But again, player and community opinion can sway them to make decisions that are incongruent with the evidence, or they can point them in the right direction. Remember earlier when I talked about the things that make a player choice overpowered? One of them was if the player choice is too easy to use, extremely effective, and hard to counter. Let's take the shotgun example again. Shotguns can be easy to use in the case of auto shotguns, but pump actions are quite difficult. I won't argue that they're not extremely effective in cases where the target is closer than 20 meters. Are they excessively hard to counter? That's debatable, as there are numerous other weapons that have killing times in the same ballpark, and player strategy and the map layout can impact their usefulness. This is where having access to information would help a developer to decide. Information can be provided by players, the community at large, and data. But we're not all developers, and we certainly don't have access to a huge trove of data like that for Battlefield 4. So what then? I think the biggest game balance crime I see players commit is to call something overpowered and then refuse to use that very thing. If you think something is overpowered and you're not using it in your play, you're in essence choosing to lose to that very thing. Or, even worse, you're choosing to not fully understand the possible shortcomings of a player choice. Which I think is the most important lesson for Battlefield players to understand. don't merely parrot something you've been told without finding out for yourself. Attempt to deeply understand the situation. Back to the M16A3 from Battlefield 3. I knew a lot of players who refused to use it because they considered it to be overpowered. If it was so good in every situation, why wouldn't you choose to use it? You'd be making your own point about it being overpowered, and you're playing within the constraints that the developers created for the game. It's up to the developers to balance the game, not weapon snobs. But if you want to get the developers' attention about a design flaw, something that is actually overpowered, you have to use solid data. Anecdotes are not data. A collection of anecdotes is also not data. Cherry picking and editing video to make your point is also not data. When you do these things, you might as well be declaring everything is overpowered, because from one player's perspective, nearly everything is overpowered. So what can we do as players or community participants? Make honest assessments about the choices we have in a game. Use what data is available to us and reasoned examples of how a choice, a weapon, or a strategy might actually be overpowered. Try to disprove that something is overpowered when you disagree. Discourse among players is extremely important. Parroting popular opinion is poisonous to this process. And most importantly, try to be an expert about the thing you're talking about. Try to see it from every angle. And whatever you do, don't stop using a strategy because you think it's overpowered. Prove it to be so. And maybe you'll see that not everything is overpowered. That's it for this video, folks. I know I'm not perfect, and I'm not really sure what kind of discussion I'm looking to spur with this, but if you have thoughts on the balance of Battlefield going forward, I'd love to hear more about it. I'm always happy to be proven wrong because it means I learned something. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, YouTube.